We thought it would be fascinating to travel to Jackson, Mississippi, the setting of Catherine Stockett's novel, to get reaction from women who are members of book clubs in that town. And they're joining me via Skype from Lemuria Bookstore in Jackson. And from left to right, we have Sandra Grady and then May Covington. And then on the right is Sally Fran Ross. Nice to talk to you all. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me start with you, Sally Fran, because you and May Covington, who you're sitting next to, have a very special and wonderful connection. Tell me what that is.
Okay. Well, May and I are about 10 years apart, age-wise, but her mother worked for my family all of my life and retired from working for my family. And so I got to know May through Mamie, her mama, all those years.
And May, and you obviously have kept up with Sally Fran, and you all formed a lifelong relationship because of your mom?
Of course.
And what was it like for your mom? You know, obviously the help is so much about the relationship between white families and African American maids in the early 1960s during a very volatile period of time in our nation's history. But from your perspective, what was it like being the daughter of someone who cared for Sally Fran's family and her siblings?
It was great because my mom and Sally Fran and her sister had great relationship. It was not like a black and white thing. I'm not so sure it was like that with her mom and dad, but with the kids, it was just all natural.
So you felt there was a lot of love between your mom and the white children, well, Sally Fran, and I guess you had siblings, Sally Fran?
I do. Lee, my sister.
And how would you describe the relationship from your perspective? Because it seems a little bit like May Mobley and Abilene in the book.
Are you talking to me or May?
Yes, I'm talking to you, Sally Fran. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I don't know about the early years. I really wasn't aware of the sacrifices that Mamie was making for us. I mean, I was very centered on my own life, and it wasn't until civil rights stuff sort of started, and I became aware of that I realized that Mamie had a whole nother life, and there were sacrifices that she was making for us. So we sort of developed two different relationships. I had the relationship with Mamie in front of my parents, and then I had the relationship with Mamie outside of my parents, and they were really different. And I got an opportunity to get to know May and her family, but they were very separate from my parents.
And May, did you resent it all, having your mom away so much of the time, caring for this whole second family? Because I know that you have said that she wasn't around much for your brother Chester. And did it make you at all angry that she had this whole nother life and these children that she cared about, when after all she's your mom?
In a way, I did because I was an only child and there was no dad in the house. So yeah, it was kind of like my mom was being taken away from me.
And you said you weren't sure about the love between Sally Fran's parents, or if the relationship between her parents and your mom. Was there some inherent tension there? And how did Sally Fran's parents treat your mom?
I think they treated her well, but I mean, she was black. But as a black person, I think they treated her well.
But there were probably a lot of social norms that many people would find hard to accept today, in terms of, for example, was she not allowed to eat supper with well, Sally Fran, maybe you can describe what it was like for May's mom, Mamie, working in your house. Was it like the help?
Yep, it was like that. I mean, she worked, it's hard to even talk about. She worked on holidays, like Mamie worked, remember, May?
And the weekends, Saturdays and Sundays.
Saturdays and Sundays.
And then she'd babysit, stay over all night a lot of times.
That's right.
And then after work there at Sally Fran's home, she would go to Dr. Ross' office and clean there. So she was gone all day, every day.
And to make it even more complicated, Mamie's husband would work at Daddy's office with Mamie cleaning up after that. So it made the day just, I mean, it's
A full
unbearable.
day, a 12-hour day.
Horrible.
How did your
Horrible.
parents treat her? I mean, were there certain limitations, obviously, to the relationship?
Well, I think theirs was, you want to say, May?
No, it was. It was. Like we say, that's back in the 60s. The younger people nowadays would not believe how things were back in the 60s. And being a child myself, I knew what was going on, but not as much as I would have known had I been older. But you can always look back at that.
Sandra,
But,
what? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, May.
Well, my mom had to get the bus from the black neighborhood and transfer to another bus to the white neighborhood. And sometimes if she'd work late, Mrs. Ross would bring her home, but she always had to sit in the back seat. She couldn't sit in the front seat. She could not go in the front door. She had to go in the back door.
And did she have to eat her supper at a separate table? I mean, she would never join the family for any meals.
No, she didn't join the family. And I'm thinking, this was years ago, I'm thinking she ate at the table after the family ate.
And did she have a separate bathroom like they did in The Help?
Yes, ma'am.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Sandra, reading about this, I know you're 46 years old, which seems very young to me. I hope you don't mind that I said that publicly. Tell me how you felt about this book and what you learned from this book, if anything.
Well, initially, I was just glad to see a book that gave voice to women, not just, black women rather, but from that era, that is a very, well, I don't need to tell anybody, a very volatile period. So it's just fascinating. And I'm listening to this conversation, and I had no idea because I just met these ladies, and this is incredible. So it's starting to make me challenge and reevaluate everything I read in The Help. But my impressions, like I said initially, I'm just glad to hear those voices.
How did some African American readers have criticized the book for having a very distinctive black dialect for the maids and virtually no dialect for the white families. And I'm curious how you felt about that when you read the book, Sandra.
When I read this book, I guess I'm auditory, and when I read, I give every character a voice. And because I'm so familiar with this, with of course, with Jackson and that time period, I thought she did a great job with the language. She obviously has an ear for the language still, and an ear for the narrative as well. So I didn't think it was caricaturistic at all. Because it's been worse. I've seen worse. And so I thought she was very even-handed in it.
It was a really strong voice. That's what impressed me. I mean, it was not a weak voice. Like, you saw power in the white community, a socioeconomic sort of situation, but then you saw power by those words and the people. So the power, you saw kind of a contrast between two kinds of power that was just, it was, for me, and May and I've talked about it, it was like, Mamie had a voice in that. And May had a voice.
I think she did well. Because it would be like telling all these things the way things were then and saying at the end of dinner, Minnie and Miss Tilly, whatever his name was, would go out to the pool and have a swim.
Yeah.
And then she'd have to come back in and go to her bathroom, the black bathroom, So she kept it the way it should have been, and the language was like that at that time, because in slavery time, the blacks were not allowed to go to school or learn to read or anything, so they talk like that. She's just being truthful.
I know, May, that you worked as a maid for about 10 years before you took a job, I guess, as a technician or working with an X-ray group. Is that right?
Yes.
But you had quite a different experience than your mom did, didn't you, as when you worked as a maid?
Um, Not really. I mean, I didn't sit down at the table and eat with them. I could use the bathroom. I could come in the front door. And I had my own car, so I guess you would say I think I could have rode in the front seat with her. But it was a big difference, but you still knew that you're black and you're the maid and they're white and they're superior.
Hmm.
Is there still an awful lot of racism in Jackson, Mississippi? And how has this book been received? Because, when I talked to Catherine Stockett about it, she said actually close members of her family weren't speaking to her in the wake of this book. And I'm just curious how people in Jackson, I mean, obviously it's not a monolithic community and everyone has different opinions, but in general, what have you heard people saying about the book, Sandra?
Actually, not much. And I think probably the reason it's back at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list is because it's starting to make its way into the black community. Because I don't think initially you reread this book. I read it last March with my book club. But so I haven't heard much talk on the street, as it were, about this particular book.
How about you? How about May and Sally Fran? What have you been hearing about it?
I don't belong to a book club. I don't read a lot. Sally Fran insisted that I read the book. And she said, no, and she promised me I wouldn't want to put it down if I started to read. She was telling the truth. It's a great, great book. I'm just not, I was into reading when I was younger. Now, I had 7 children, and it's kind of like I want my time, it may be selfish, but I want my time for me to do what I want to do, whether it's go shopping, watch TV, rearrange my furniture, whatever. I want this to be my time.
And Sally Fran, what about you? What are your friends saying about it? Do you have any white friends who are angry about the way because the black characters, in my opinion, have so much more humanity and elegance and depth, and other than Skeeter, who of course is the one really truly self-actualized white character, they're not the white community is certainly not portrayed in a very good light in this book.
Well, 2 things. I mean, it'll be. I was sitting there when May and I were talking at the beginning, and I was going, "Oh, wait until Lee sees this." My sister. I mean, we'll see how. I hope she reacts positive to it because we're telling the truth.
Yeah,
but I just hope so because that's just the way it was. It's just the way it was. And my aunt, my cousin, and my cousins and my aunts. But the thing about it is, where I work right now, it's black and white. It's an office that has black folks and white folks, and so, in that office we've talked about the book. I'm not in a book club either, but we've talked about it, and not in detail about it. But there's a freedom where I work where it's not. You don't notice. I mean, I'm free. I'm very free at where I work to speak my mind and say my piece. And people there, black and white, are able to speak their mind and say their piece. And
is that unusual? Is that unusual in Jackson?
Not at all. I just don't. It doesn't surprise me that the book may not have been as well received in certain circles of Jackson or the South even, but. We just like every place else, the more you watch the news, you find out we have our problems, but you have to keep things in their historical context. And that's why even conversations about the dialects now, it's better. It's definitely better. And I remember, because my elementary school was in Northeast Jackson, so I can remember seeing white women driving with little kids in the front seat. This is before, of course, kids in the back seat. And black women in their white uniforms sitting in the back seat. And I was thinking, my mother would never let me ride in the front seat and an adult ride in the back seat. And I one day I asked about it, and that's how I found out, what that dynamic was. But you were talking about humanity, Katie. What I was struck by was the total dysfunctionality between the mothers and the daughters. And I realized it's because they didn't know one another. Even Catherine Stockett said, her mother brought her home. The lady who worked for them took her from her mother, took her out of her arms. So I would imagine that Haley probably loved the lady who worked for her family because she and her mother didn't get along. The Mobley's mom and her mother didn't get along.
Yeah, Elizabeth or whatever. Yeah, that was an awfully strained and sad relationship. It was almost she really, really disliked her daughter, and the only love that May Mobley got was from Aibileen. And it was really interesting and such a contrast to parenting today, where parents are almost over involved with raising their children. I was going to ask you, Sally Fran. It's almost. Oh wait, before I do, I wanted to ask you, Sandra. I know that you were born just after Medgar Evers was killed, and I thought it was interesting when you asked your own mother what that summer was like. What did she say to you, Sandra?
It was hot.
Mm-hmm. And she never really elaborated, did she?
She didn't have to. I saw it in her face. Because she meant that literally and figuratively.
And Sally Fran, is there a little bit of Skeeter in you? When I read your reaction to the book and your relationship with Mamie reminded me of Skeeter's. I talk like these people are all real. Catherine told me, Katie, these are not real people. But Skeeter's relationship with Constantine, when I read about your relationship with Mamie, it was so deep and so profound. And I think you were asking a lot of the questions Skeeter was asking in the book, weren't you, when you were younger?
I can say this about Mamie, that it's not Mamie, it's Mamie. But I guess to show the depth, first of all, a lot of who I am has been formed by Mamie, and not the stuff that was on the surface in the book, but really, really deep things, Katie. And whenever I got to be a grandmother, I have 4 grandchildren. And when I got to be a grandmother, and you start playing around with cute little names about what you're going to be called, it just hit me one day. I'm going to be Big Mama. You knew that, didn't you?
I know.
Yeah, Mamie was Big Mama. And so, I hope I'm not as big as Mamie. I'm not as big as Mamie is. But when they asked me what I wanted to be called, it wasn't a silly, cute, this will be a fun kind of name. It was like, I want to be Big Mama. I want to love my grandchildren at a distance, maybe not as intimately as Mamie. I don't want to take away from their parents, my daughters, but that's the kind of influence that Mamie had on me, that I wanted to be called her. It's like naming a child something. In reverse, I named myself after her, which I just think
that is powerful.
To me, it really is. It really is.
May I say something?
Sure.
As much as bad as things were back then, I can truly say, even if Sally Fran don't agree, I'm talking about what I saw. There was a real relationship between my mom and Sally Fran. There was love there. I saw it. And Sally Fran, even after my mom retired, she still came by to check on my mom. She checked on my brother. I have a brother that I'm 19 years older than, so we're both like an only child. And she's just a wonderful person. And we've kept up with each other all this time. Sometimes we kind of lose a little contact, but then she'll find me or I'll find her.
Well,
but I didn't have my voice quite. I started getting my voice once I left Jackson. I use that term. May, she can say that she didn't have a voice, and she can say, I didn't speak out very much, but she did. We talked back in those days. We had a free line. I remember a free line of communication. I know I did with Mamie about, I don't understand this. Why? Why don't you? Mamie had never, you don't know whether you know that or not, but Mamie had never eaten in a white restaurant.
Yeah, I did.
She had never eaten
until
she went with us and wouldn't go. And I said, oh, yes, you are. And then it was like it was a really powerful thing when she actually went across the line and sat down in a restaurant, and I was just, that's amazing to me. But I didn't get my voice until later.
Well,
You know,
see,
but-
being younger, when they start to allow us to go into white restaurants, my cousin and I, every weekend we try a different restaurant because all this was new to us. You know, we had to go to the greasy
True.
spoons, you know, or go to the back door and they would hand us a sandwich out. And we could go and be treated well, regardless of how they felt behind it. We were treated well once, you know, it opened up for us. But Sally Brand, even when after my mom retired, she reminds me of this all the time, how she came and washed mom's feet and
Oh, yeah.
washed my mother's feet and trimmed them down for her, and she just did everything for her.
Aw, well, that's wonderful that you guys have had such a long lasting relationship. And Sandra, before we go, or are you looking forward to the movie? You know, it's so cool because Catherine's childhood friend, a fellow named Tate Taylor, who's also from Jackson, is directing the movie version of The Help. And I don't know, I'm always reluctant to see the movie version of a book that I just love so much. How do you feel about the movie? Are you excited about it?
I'm very excited, particularly if it's going to be made here in Jackson. I mean, that would be, because it's so wonderful to see a street name. So, oh, I know that street.
Yeah,
It's great. I hope they will not just do it on a soundstage in L.A. or whatever, but it's wonderful, and I'm excited.
Well,
and all those buildings that were mentioned in the book are still here. Some of the Virginia 14 is still there. It's just has a name change, but it's still there. And Fortification Street and Woodrow Wilson Bridge, all of that.
Fornication Street.
Well, I can't wait. I can't wait to see the movie. I was really sad when I finished the book because it was one of those books where you just don't want it to end. So I cried not only because of the ending, but I cried because the book was over. And I'm glad that you all liked it as well. Sally, Fran, and May and Sandra, I really appreciate you talking to me. And I think that you all might stick around and talk a little more after I say goodbye. I just have this feeling.
It's a good thing.
You're probably right.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. It was really nice meeting all of you. Appreciate it.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.